state is the sponsor of the project through the core, and ARFCD does. Someone fact.
And well, we also are a local maintaining
Yeah,
agency.
you're part of SAPCA. Yeah, that's part of it. You run in SAPCA.
Yeah.
Great organization. So I started dealing with SAPCA in the early 1990s. And it was a volleyball project.
No.
I stumbled over my words a little bit. Country.
Too big or too small. It's just gonna be hard.
That's really after Safeca formed.
Yeah, right. They formed because of that. I think they were formed because of that particular project.
Okay.
The first round of snowy walls that we did and the work we did. Still laughing, right?
Yeah. They are. So, were you expecting to see microphones or?
Is it okay?
So I think it's gonna be.
I don't know why we don't have sound.
I
Other
think
than
this is the-
perhaps they just haven't turned it on yet.
Yeah, probably.
And people are debating.
Do you want to come up?
You know, appreciate you guys. Yeah, you see what we can do, yeah.
Well,
Oh, thank you. We're only responsible for so much, right? We're responsible for the grading system and the surrounding area. We coordinate with a lot of other agencies, but we don't have a lot of control.
I don't know why I just lost it, but I did.
Well, yeah, I think we have council members that are on the board and staff. Other than that, our department is not really directly involved with them. We have meetings up with them regularly, but we don't. Again, we just
Yeah, okay.
share information with them and they're sharing with us.
I used to deal with McCullough. He was a lieutenant colonel. His dad was a colonel in the Corps of Engineers. And the dad came to work at the Reclamation Board. And Bert was the lieutenant colonel of the Corps of Engineers. And then we took with the city. Interesting. He was with the city.
It says it's recording right now, but
Very, very strong will guy.
again, I have no idea why we're getting no sound.
Yeah, but I think it's possible that they want to turn some on.
Compensation cost of electricity.
Did you see Picker Heads here?
I was, I volunteered to work at university.
Charles.
I got a lot of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
those are both mine too, because I took all these questions. Yeah.
Well, you have a lot more knowledge than us. You know,
Oh, good.
Daniel's only
Okay.
been sitting for a year. I've only been supervising the flood
Okay,
section.
good. So I just about assessments coverage, I didn't know about myself, so it wasn't on my list. Okay, this one.
On a daily basis. runs our flood section.
We've been engaging her more.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. Yeah.
Getting her.
Well, I'm waiting for Steve.
We're back up so much.
I know.
Ideally, you'd be- We're back.
Yeah. no.
But he emailed me yesterday, double check the address and everything, so.
Get lost over here.
Because well, I did when I moved in.
That's right.
Everything looks the same.
Yes, it does. And you'll keep these and then you'll, or do you want me to keep these?
You want to hold it and bring it to you?
Yeah. And you're the one that we'll bring them to when we get some. Are you gonna ask people? If they're-
Gary and I will kind of get this side.
So they're gonna be going around and getting. Huh?
Oh,
You went back. Well, I know, I told him. So I was gonna help him. Well, if he does, then I'll have you, he can hand them over to you and have you. do it. Oh, hi. Cheryl. She already has it. Oh, our boyfriend's here.
Yeah.
And the girlfriend.
Yeah.
So. No, I'm gonna wait till it's right at 6.
Who wants to pick up the cards? I don't mind.
What?
If Ricardo wants to pick up cards, I don't mind.
No, you guys just do it.
Okay,
He knows that you're doing it, so just keep it that
okay,
way.
you got.
Be better, different.
Looks like he's gonna be a good boy.
Let's hope. Well, They all gonna work out just fine. It's all gonna work out fine. I think so.
I'm just not gonna worry about him.
Yeah, I like the turnout.
Yeah, but Stephen John, that's.
Are you still here? Oh, let's be more chairs. Thank you. Bye.
I might wait. I just wanna
Please
see.
make sure you are muted.
Hey, John.
I'm saying,
How are you, John? How are you doing? I didn't know you. Are you okay?
Yeah, I have a heart issue.
Yeah,
And I just need to slow down.
gotta
before I
take
get
care of
fixed,
yourself.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Okay.
The name tag, let's stick to the shirt.
Oh, the material. This is sitting. Bathroom
Surrounded on all sides.
Okay, Edith Lohman, yeah.
everywhere.
Okay, well, then I'll wait for her to come out. Huh?
Oh, the guy, Steve Johns from.
Is he
American
coming?
River Flood Control.
So he's on the way out,
What I was gonna say.
walking up the stairs. Oh,
Johns. I'm Jackie.
Oh, hi.
So nice to meet you. Oh, yeah, it's the first time that I really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Nancy Orndorfer. Head of our- Thank you, Steve, for being here and having everybody sit at the table. There's a
Okay,
space for
great.
the table. And then what I'm going to do at the very beginning, I'm going to just introduce you all by name. And then Tina from Russo is going to be the first
I
one.
sent him the schedule.
Okay, so you've got that. Okay, so you
Okay,
know that.
great.
So, okay, very good. So I think there's a name for you on the table.
Yeah.
Hard to say he
I thought that too.
trying to.
Let's keep dropping. Bill. Yeah, that's how the way it shows us very good.
There,
She's put her photos for sharing his thoughts.
Elizabeth.
For this. I guess you're.
Yeah.
You think Elizabeth went home? You think she went home? No. Oh, good, good, good. Getting everybody seated. And your name's there on the table. Okay.
You okay?
Yes, ma'am. How are you? Good to see you. I saw Paula Saturday.
Oh, I have the cutest picture. I sent her a picture of her husband.
The South levee was built first and then these. You know when these were, the northern side was built?
Yeah.
Of course I said no. I searched for that necklace for 15 years and it was just supposed to help him. The glory was to be mine. But you knew he was onto something, didn't you? Oh, yeah. Very close standings about the club about the necklace that I had never heard before.
So you staked out the club and stand show you shot.
I didn't shoot him, detective. Yes, I had a pistol with me and a bullet that my trademarks. Everyone knows that. I brought a mask and brought salt because I was simply going to threaten him.
So the Sac State event, he says 144,000 CFS.
Lying in wait.
Yeah.
Stan went downstairs when we returned. He was.
Because the numbers we have is 135,000. The numbers we have is 130. Okay. Just want to make sure.
It was above the maximum.
Okay. Yeah.
I think 7.
Yeah.
Now the design of both.
160.
Never heard before.
So you staked out the cabin when Stan showed you shot him.
I didn't shoot him, detective. Yes, I had a pistol with me and a bullet they're my trademarks. Everyone knows that.
Yeah, I was gonna put the 160
because I was simply going to
I just want to count up and
So what happened?
I was lying in wait.
Good evening. It's so nice to see so many of you here. And I'm glad it's not pouring down rain outside tonight. I'm Nancy Arndorfer, and I chair the ILS committee. And we have a good evening planned here for you. We're going to be passing out little white cards, and we have pencils if you don't have a pencil or pen to write.
Make any notes until you get
I'm
back.
having a little.
I searched his body, but whoever knocked me out took the blue butterfly with them. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but we've got a confession. Our case.
I could try. It's kind of like whack-a-mole.
Okay, good. That's good. Okay, what I'm going to do is just briefly introduce the four speakers that we have this evening. And the first one is Tina from Russo, and she has COVID. So we're going to be seeing her on Zoom tonight. And then we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards. So with Tina, we'll have her Q&A after she speaks. So you've got the cards and the pencils, and Bill and Jerry will be coming around and picking those questions up. So then after that, having to look at this, we have Edith Lohman at the end of the table. And she's from the FEMA region and FEMA region 9, Western states, and the National Flood Insurance Program and Disaster Relief Programs. Daniel Smith and Neal Joyce from the Sacramento Department of Utilities, Sacramento Flood Defense and Floodplain Management. And then Stephen Johns is the American River Flood Control, I can't even say it, District American River Flood Control System, and you're the vice president. So they will be speaking later. And first, we're going to get Tina on this through Zoom. Betsy's.
Yeah. Tina, you go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start.
Can't hear you.
Hopefully, my audio is coming through clear for you folks. And I'm very sad that I can't be there today because it looks like you guys have a wonderful turnout. It's not often that we see so many people in person and then also have so many participants on Zoom. So just a stellar lineup for you folks tonight. The committee did a bang up job getting everybody there, and you're going to have some really wonderful information this evening. So thank you for having me digitally. Appreciate your patience. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina Keele. I'm with Russo Insurance Agency. And I've worked with the agency for the last 20 years. So that's my boss, Mr. Richard Russo. He's been in the business for over 40 years, and he hasn't aged a day since I started working there, I'll have you know. So he looks exactly the same. But I've had the privilege of working with him, and his niche is homeowners associations. So that's how I came up in the business, was basically learning HOAs of every different kind throughout the years. And so it's been my pleasure to serve Nepenthe for the last several years now. Our agency took over in 2021, and it's been a delight to get to know many of you and to work with the board and now this committee. And so appreciate you all for having me. So I have some points of focus tonight. I'm going to be focusing on what your current insurance policy entails, specifically property and liability. I want to focus on what you folks need as owners. And then we'll talk about the flood insurance as well, so that you have some information on kind of all of your coverage as a whole. So I know right now, particularly, we've seen a lot of storm-related damage in the last month, and quite a few storms that have kept me up at night, I can tell you that much. So property is a big focus right now for most folks. So I wanted to really highlight what the master policy covers as far as our interior and exterior and guide owners to what they need. So on the next slide, we'll see that the community actually as a whole has over 119 million in coverage. And this is, we say building and property, but that limit right there is specific to any of your building and structures within the community. So your 591 units, your clubhouse, cabana, your pool house, all of your buildings and structures within that community have over 119 million in coverage. With farmers insurance, this is a blanket policy limit, so we do not have a per unit or per building limit. So if you have a complete and total loss to one of your buildings, we're not taking that number and dividing it by the number of buildings and then extrapolating a value from there. It's a very broad policy form, and it works out wonderfully in those times of need when you do have a loss. So we calculate that as your complete and total value for the community. Farmers insurance does have an endorsement included on their policy. It's called extended replacement cost. So in the event that the community did suffer an area-wide loss, a complete and total loss, if that value was not sufficient, values do increase during those types of disasters, so that extended replacement cost would come into play if needed. So the community has actually over 178 million in coverage with that extended replacement cost coverage endorsement. So it's a real stellar policy, one of the broadest policy forms that you can obtain, and we're thankful that Farmers Insurance has that ability to write Nepenthe. The building property deductible is $25,000. That's a change from last year to this year. And really, in the scope of our insurance market today, the norm is really becoming higher values. You know, 5-10 years ago, we would see $1,000 as the property deductible. But you know, these days we're seeing the norm as $10,000, and in some cases $25,000 as values increase for replacement. As the insurance market has hardened and rates increase, a lot of communities have moved that direction. And the biggest thing that, the biggest conversation we have with owners is what the interior coverage is. So these policies cover the structures, but it's to what we call a walls out or a bare walls policy. So I thought it would be helpful to include the photo that is on this slide to give you folks as owners a visual of what bare walls or walls out means. So we're going to, as an example, if there was a fire that damaged a building and we were going to rebuild it, our policy will rebuild to what this picture shows. And you as an owner would be responsible to finish the interior, and that includes, you know, cabinetry, countertops, all of the fixtures, toilets, sinks, tubs, all of the above, anything that would create your interior of your home. We call that walls in. So it's very crucial that owners are aware of this policy form so they can protect themselves by way of purchasing their own individual coverage to protect themselves for the innards of their unit or the walls in of their unit. So we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides. I wanted to highlight the deductible a little bit because I know this is a common question. On the next slide, I pointed out essentially your governing document, section 10.8, and I also included a blurb from your annual insurance disclosure. It's actually straight from civil code. So a lot of people get confused on if the deductible is per unit, if it's per building. This is actually a per occurrence deductible. So that entails essentially if you have one large storm, any damage that occurred in that storm is all going to be one large deductible. So folks do question that often, and I'm happy to report that it is per occurrence. And your governing documents are very clear on how they handle the deductible. So essentially, you know, owners that are affected by a loss, that deductible is the responsibility of the association to decide whether they're going to, you know, assess the unit owners equally, those that are affected. I hear some reverb there. But these governing document provisions are extremely clear, and that's very helpful. We don't see this very often. So we want to highlight that owners may be responsible for the whole deductible or a portion of the deductible, and there's ways that you can protect yourself from having that expense by way of your own individual insurance policy. We'll go into that again in a couple of slides when we talk about your individual insurance coverage and how you can protect yourself and buy coverage that will cover an assessment for a deductible. Just real quick to highlight the liability of the community as the other portion of your coverage throughout. Your CC&Rs require you to have public general liability. And on the next slide, if we could forward over there. Thank you, Betsy. So the association's required to have a certain level of liability per their governing document. You folks have a $1 million per occurrence limit. Your directors and officers, board members, committee members, and volunteers are also protected under your directors and officers liability for $2 million. And the association has an excess liability policy for $10 million. What that all means is essentially you have a general liability total per occurrence limit of $11 million. Your D&O liability or your directors and officers liability is a total of $12 million. And there are no deductibles for the general liability policy. The directors and officers does have a small $1,000 deductible, but you folks have a great level of liability coverage there, and those umbrella policies are really important for a community that has, you know, the amenities that you folks do with the pools and tennis courts and pickleball courts. And so the board has made sure that you folks have that umbrella coverage that extends over those underlying policies to add a full or broader protection for you. So in a nutshell, that is the association's property and liability coverage policies as a brief overview. And in the next slide, I have a feeling this is where most of you are going to take the bulk of your notes because this is where I want to focus on what you folks need as individuals. Years ago, when these individual policies were created, they were really focused on condo policies. So kind of the airspace in between and a couple of coverage highlights here or there. And obviously throughout the years, they've evolved. We have not only condominium, but we have planned unit developments or PUDs, which Nepenthe is. And it requires more specialized coverages. So this individual policy that you folks purchase on your own to protect yourselves, your property, your contents is called an HO6 policy, or a homeowner 6, HO6 policy. Sometimes it's referred to as a condo contents policy. And these policies are somewhat like a renter's policy with some added features built in. But really the focus for you folks is the first bullet point, and that's that building or dwelling coverage. And every carrier is a little bit different as to how they come up with these values or require these values. So, you know, we want to make sure that we understand that every carrier is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we need folks to purchase a good amount of building or dwelling coverage for that interior. If we can visualize that photo on the first slide where it was just the sheetrock and a little bit of texture there, you folks have to rebuild the rest of that interior. And every unit is a little bit different. So there's not a standard amount, you know, 50,000 or 100,000, for example. You really have to look at the upgrades or updates that have been done to your unit, perhaps not even by you, perhaps a previous owner or an owner before that. They have done a considerable amount of upgrades, and these homes were built in the 70s. So there's probably been a significant amount of those upgrades. So every unit is a little bit different, and you have to calculate what it would cost you truly to rebuild those interiors, and make sure that you include that limit on your individual HO6 policies. So this is a big conversation to have with your insurance agent, your personal insurance agent. And some carriers have replacement cost estimators for just the interior, so that's really handy. I think a general value we start out is at least 75,000 for interiors and above, just depending on if it's original developer or if it has been updated to a significant level. So this is the most crucial part of your coverage on those HO6 policies, to ensure that if you have a fire or you have another casualty, that you can rebuild your interior dwelling structure of that unit. The next portion is your content. So this is anything that you bring into the unit when you move in, or what you would take out when you left. If you sold the unit, these are all the things that would come with you. So those include clothing, your furniture, appliances, any of your personal belongings. We think of the things in our kitchen alone, and that's quite an expense. But there's also specialty items like jewelry and artwork, computers, firearms, and every carrier has a value or a limit that they will provide for you on jewelry, specifically artwork. Sometimes you have furs and valuables, and you want to make sure that your agent is aware of those specialty items specifically. You may have to schedule those items or provide some special documentation so that they can cover those properly. Some policies, for example, limit your jewelry to $1,000, $5,000, same with computer and artwork. So if you have anything particularly special, make sure that you have that conversation with your agent. I always recommend that you take as many photos or videos of your home as possible. And the reason for this is, in the event of, the worst possible scenario, a claim or a loss, whether it be a fire or otherwise, you're under a great deal of stress, and it's hard to remember all of the things that existed in your home at that time. So pictures and a video will allow you to give that to a claims adjuster, and they can review it, helps you recall what you have. We have a lot of customers that we guide to make personal inventory lists. So they go through their home and they write down per room what they have as far as their contents are concerned. We highly encourage you to do the same. It's really worth its weight in gold in the event of a loss, and it also helps the adjuster compute how much they're going to pay out in that loss, and what was actually damaged and what needs to be replaced. So that's very helpful. Your personal liability is your liability within the home. That's one line item. You know, we used to say at minimum $300,000, but it seems as though the new norm is $500,000. This is another conversation you'll have with your insurance agent, and most agents will do a calculation based on where you are in terms of, you know, your properties that you own, your assets. They want to make sure that you're properly protected. In some cases, you might get a personal umbrella policy to go above all of your other policies. That way, if you do have an incident, you have yourself protected by insurance, and your assets can't be forfeited. So personal liability is really dependent on you individually, and that's a conversation to have with your individual agent to come up with that value. Loss of assessment or loss assessment coverage is where we can protect ourselves for that master insurance deductible that I was speaking about. So the association's policy has a $25,000 deductible, and that's per occurrence. But let's just imagine that your unit were the only unit that was affected by the damage. Of course, you have your policy that covers your building and dwelling. So the idea is that working together, the master policy and your HO6 policy would virtually cover all of those damages. And you would have your small deductible typically around $500 or $1,000. But in some cases, there might be multiple units affected. Your coverage may go directly to paying your dwelling, and there may be an assessment for the deductible. So I recommend that your loss assessment coverage be at $25,000. Some carriers do not offer a loss assessment, but I encourage you to find a carrier that is able to provide this. It's a very inexpensive coverage line. So I think $10,000 in loss assessment is $4 for the year in insurance premium. So it's a very inexpensive part of the whole policy, but I encourage you to find a carrier that can cover up to $25,000 so that you're protected in the event of that larger assessment. And again, this is an assessment that would come as a result of damage to your unit, a covered insurance claim, you know, fire or some other casualty that would occur. And the last and certainly a big highlighted coverage line is loss of use. And in some cases, if you rent your unit out, that would be loss of rent coverage. In the event that your unit is damaged, this would pay for you to stay elsewhere. This limit is typically a limit that is a percentage of either your building, dwelling, or your content. So a lot of policies just automatically provide a limit of coverage for you. We see a lot of owners that don't realize that, you know, their limit is not as sufficient as they would have had it at the time of loss. They find that out once they've had a loss. So I recommend that you really look at that limit and ensure that you have a significant or sufficient amount of coverage to allow you to stay at another premise, whether that be a hotel or another place of residence for a significant amount of time. Unfortunately, you know, we'd like to think that we could get back into our unit and inhabit it as quickly as possible, but things do take time. And if you have a situation where there've been a lot of losses in your area, you might have contractors or vendors that will take a little bit of time to get to your home to repair it. Water damage claims are typically those types of claims, fire claims, of course. But I urge people to really focus on that loss of use coverage and ensure that you have a sufficient amount of coverage on your policy for that, so that you have the funds to stay elsewhere should the worst occur.
You know, I have just a few
So-
questions. I'm sorry.
Sure.
One question is, does walls out include HVAC, insulation, electric wires, and out light coverage? Or things in or behind drywall?
So if I heard you correctly, does walls out include HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, things of that nature?
Yes.
So if we go back to that photo, we go right back up to the sheetrock and the subfloor. So we're going to bring all of those components up to those walls and right to the fixture. HVACs are typically on the exterior. And so those are a part of a coverage line on the master policy. So essentially just think of all the electrical and plumbing and your HVAC going right to those walls, and that's where we stop.
Okay. If Nepenthe retains flood insurance coverage, may I purchase additional coverage? And are there any restrictions or issues? That question's been pretty much answered, but what do you want to say more about it?
Sure. The last slide actually is the flood insurance coverage for the community. And this is the current policy that you folks have through the National Flood Insurance Program. It was most of the policies, not all of the policies, because we have sales that happen throughout the year. Most of them are new December 14th. Anytime there's a new purchase or a name change, we have to do a rewrite on those policies. And so there are policies available that you can obtain higher limits of coverage. We would need to wait until these policies are at their expiration point, and that's certainly available. I haven't personally run across a policy that will go in excess of these policies, but there are carriers that will write higher limits than what the maximum limits are with the National Flood
What do you
Insurance
think in
policy.
excess means?
In excess means in over or above these limits that you see here, the 250,000 in building coverage and the contents, mainly the building coverage.
I have a question here that I rent a storage shed. Does my insurance cover that?
Typically with regards
I
to
wouldn't think so.
contents that, yeah, if you have your HO6 policy, if you're concerned about your contents that are located at a different location, typically 10% of your contents limit on your HO6 policy will cover your contents elsewhere. And I would check with your insurance agent to see if that limit it differs from that. Typically it's 10%.
Are there any other questions? I just had a few cards. I just wanted to make sure that everyone had, so we want to move on. Tina, thank you so much. I hope you're feeling all right, and I hope you feel better real soon. And thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for your patience. I sincerely, really do thank you for that. And if any questions come up after this, please don't hesitate to call.
Thank you. Okay, Edith Lohman is the FEMA Region 9 Western States Director, and she's talked about National Flood Insurance Program and disaster relief programs.
Hi, good evening. Can you guys hear me okay? No. Okay, how about now? Ah, okay. So we have to get very cozy with the mic here. Well, good evening, everyone. And I want to thank the board for inviting me here. My name is actually Edie. My official name is Edith, but that's my mom's name. So we have Big Edie and Little Edie, and I'm the Little Edie, even though the Little Edie is bigger than the Big Edie. Anyway, follow all that, and that's good. So I go by Edie. I work for FEMA Region 9, which is in Oakland, but I actually hail from Sacramento. So I live not too far away from here. So I'm thrilled to be doing a meeting at night that's actually in my own neighborhood instead of somewhere else in California where I have to travel because I do a lot of traveling. And I hope, well, first, let me tell you what I do. I am a flood insurance specialist. That's what I do 24/7. FEMA doesn't make any of the rules about the National Flood Insurance Program, but we are the designated federal agency that oversees the day-to-day operation of the National Flood Insurance Program. And so I'm the flood insurance specialist that helps answer questions for any and all of our stakeholders and handles information outreach, training, that kind of thing in our 4-state area. So we, Region 9 handles California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii. No, we don't get to go there all the time. And some of the Pacific Trust territories, of which I've never been to. So it's a pretty broad territory. I hope everybody was, my background is private insurance. I should tell you that. I've been with the federal government for about 12 years. So I get to see both sides. And when I was a baby, I was a claims adjuster. So I got to be on the, you guys are laughing. What? I look old. So I've seen a lot of different aspects of insurance, and I was a multi-line adjuster. So that means that I handled fires, floods, earthquakes, everything of the whole gamut. And we used to call California the natural theme park of the world because we have all kinds of disasters here. And so we do have the exposure. They might not happen all the time, but they do happen. So, I want to thank Tina for that great presentation because that was just amazing. That was outstanding. And I hope that you guys were really paying attention and taking some notes. And if you didn't understand things, I really encourage you. That's what you have an insurance agent for. Ask Tina, reach out to your own local insurance agent, ask questions, because if there's one thing I've learned in my career is insurance is important, but none of us want to pay for it. That's the thing, right? And the infamous last words that I always hear from everybody is, it's never going to happen to me. I'll take my chances. Well, let me just tell you, when I am not doing my steady state job at FEMA, where I am is at a disaster center, listening to a lot of people who said, it's never going to happen to me. And I don't know why I'm here because it just did happen to me. And now I need help. It is a serious situation, and I'm going to divert here just for a second. My daughter, I have a 27-year-old daughter who, hopefully someone in here can tell me one of these days when you realize it's wonderful to have children. So I have one that doesn't listen. That's the older one, the 27-year-old. And then I have a younger one who is 25. And she's a pretty good listener. So I told the, how there's open benefits when you work, they have open benefits, open enrollment that comes usually every October, November. So I told her, I said, listen, you need to buy long-term disability. Make sure you check the box for the long-term disability and the short-term disability. It isn't that much money. Make sure you check the box. Mom, stop telling us that. Quiet. I don't want to hear it anymore. Too much advice. Click, end the phone. So guess who calls me on Thursday? My 27-year-old. Mom, guess what? I fell off the curb and I broke my foot on my way to work. Oh, really? Well, did you take that long-term disability that I was telling you about? She sends me a picture of her foot. It's about twice the size, all black and blue. I'm like, you do realize that she lives in LA. Her rent's like $3,500 a month. I said, you do realize that your landlord doesn't care what your issues are, that you have to pay your rent. Remember how I was telling you should take that insurance? Oh, yeah, that. Did you do it? No answer. No answer. Okay. I stopped asking questions. But the point is, the insurance is really important. And so I can't drive that point home enough, because when I work at FEMA and I'm at these disaster centers, people come in and what they think is that there's a lot of free money out there and that there's a way that we're going to be able to make them whole. Yes, we have disaster assistance, but it's only when there's a federally declared disaster. So about 90% of the disasters are not federally declared because they don't meet the Code of Federal Regulations has a formula that they have to use. So what happens is when there's a disaster in a community, if it exceeds the capacity of that community, they go to the governor and they say, hey, you know, we need some help with this. And sometimes the state is in a position to help, and that's all further it goes. Sometimes, like with these winter storms that we just had, the governor went to the president and said, no, you know, this really exceeds our resources and capabilities. Would you consider a federal declaration? But it has to meet a certain formula in order to qualify for a federal declaration. And a lot of them don't. But let's talk about what is and isn't available for federal disaster assistance when it is declared. So Sacramento County was one of the counties that was federally declared for these storms. How many people had damage of any kind? Wind damage, flood damage, any kind of damage? Okay, so a couple of people in here. So the first line of defense is always going to be your insurance, right? And insurance is pretty good, but sometimes there's exclusions or you are underinsured, which is why Tina was telling you the things that she was telling you here tonight. So when there's a federal declaration, there is some federal disaster assistance that is available to you if you're underinsured or you don't have any insurance. But really, it consists of two pieces. One is for us, for individuals. So there is two buckets. One is public assistance. Public assistance is for governments and state and local governments that need to repair their roads, their bridges, their infrastructure. That's not for you and I, the property owner. The other bucket is for us. It's individual assistance. So sometimes the federal declarations are only for public assistance because the damages are not severe enough to meet the individual assistance criteria. But if they do meet the individual assistance criteria, that individual assistance is designed to get you out of a hole, not make you whole. And it also is contingent upon the assumption that you have some type of insurance to at least partially cover whatever loss it is. So earthquake, flood, fire, whatever it is. So that's the first thing. So if we go over to this bucket and we talk about individual assistance when there's a federally declared disaster, there are really two types of federal disaster assistance for individuals. One is a small business administration loan. How many people in here have their place paid for? Okay, I'll switch places with you. If you want to pay my mortgage, no. Mine will be paid at the end of the year. That's the bet I have with my husband. So anyway, so So the federal disaster assistance goes like this for you and I. There's the Small Business Administration Loan Program. What does that mean? That's a loan. You have to qualify for the loan and you have to repay the loan. It's a low interest rate. It's like 4%. Thank goodness that we have it. But here's what I see all the time. I see people who don't have enough insurance because they didn't talk to their insurance agent that year, or they don't have any insurance for the peril that damaged their residence. They come to the disaster center. They try to apply for federal disaster assistance. And so now, they have a place they can't live in because it's uninhabitable. So they have to pay for rent to live somewhere else. In a lot of cases, they have a mortgage that they still have to pay for on a house they can't live in. And now they have to apply for an SBA loan and pay that back over a 30-year period. I don't care what the interest rate is. When I retire, I don't want a loan of any kind. It's not in my financial plan, right? So now they have 3 different debts that they have to pay back. And, I'm very passionate about this subject because people don't hear it on the news and no one tells you this. And the only way I know is because I work these disasters and I see what happens. And it's very impactful to especially certain populations. If populations where there are young families and they're just getting started and finances are very tight, it's tough for them to make these 3 different loan payments to have a place to live. For retired people, this is not in my retirement plan when I retire in a couple of years. No. I want that covered by insurance. And insurance is not cheap. It's really not. And it's not foolproof either, but it's better than leaving it up to disaster assistance. Now, all that said, it's great that we have disaster assistance, right? It's something. There is another pot of money besides the Small Business Administration loan for all of us. That would be the Individual and Households Grant Program. We call it the IHP program. But you have to not qualify for a Small Business Administration loan to even be referred over to the Individual and Households Program, which is a grant program. That is money that you apply for if you're eligible, and you don't have to pay that back, right? But the average grant is about $6,000, $7,000. Maybe I'll push it and say it's $10,000 a year. You tell me what that is going to repair in your townhome or my house. Would that be like the toilet and one wall? Basically, in California, that's what it would be. So even that free money, if you can qualify for it, on average, we're talking maybe at the top end, $10,000. And that is only if you don't qualify for the Small Business Administration loan, because the SBA loan is really the first line of defense. So I don't want to discourage anybody by telling you don't apply for disaster assistance. Sacramento County was federally declared. There is individual assistance available. There's public assistance available for those of you that raised your hand in here and said you had some damages. The second big red light that goes off is apply for federal disaster assistance, whether you had the insurance or not, because it takes the insurance carriers a little bit of time to process your claim and get you your check. And in the event that you have some damages that were not covered by your insurance carrier, then they may be picked up by individual assistance on the grant side of the house, but you don't know that if you don't apply. The deadline is March 16th, okay? You can apply for federal disaster assistance online. How many of you have computer access? Does everybody have access to a computer? Internet? On your cell phone? There are, if you do not have access to the internet, you know, ask a friend, ask a relative if they can help you apply online. That way you don't have to go out. You don't have to, you can do it from a chair in a nice, warm, cozy room, or you can go to one of the disaster recovery centers and you can apply in person and they will do it for you. Unfortunately, the closest disaster recovery centers where they have a bunch of agencies together is in Stockton, or they just are opening one now in Contra Costa County. So not exactly close to us, which is kind of why I was encouraging people to go online. Or you can call. There's a toll-free number, which I haven't memorized. I would think I would have memorized it after all this time. And let me give you the toll-free number. It is 1-800-621-3362. So please, if you've had any damage from the winter storm, you have until March 16th to get registered. It doesn't mean that you're going to be eligible for the assistance. It doesn't mean that you need to take the assistance if it's offered to you, but just get your name in the hat by March 16th. And if by chance your insurance company doesn't cover some of your damages, then you can find out if it can be covered under the disaster declaration for individual assistance, right? Okay. So promise me you do that, because if you wait till March 17th, you won't be able to register because that's the cutoff. So again, the number is 1-800-621-3362. Or you can go to one of the disaster recovery centers, or you can go online. Any of those options will work. And I think that's really all. Those were the major talking points that I really wanted to share with you tonight. So if you have
Edith,
any
thank you
questions-
so much for being here. Are there any questions that anyone wants to ask her? Moving right along.
One there.
Someone say, I'm sorry. Stand up.
Is the individual assistance income tested?
It is based on how much insurance you have or not. And I am not an individual assistance expert.
Sorry.
At one point, I thought that it was income based, and I made that statement, and I almost got decapitated by someone who worked the individual assistance program. So I have since looked that up and learned that there's a bunch of components that go into it. So a lot of it's based on whether or not you qualify for an SBA loan. So if I'm a straight shooter, so I would answer your question, yes, but that's just me. So.
Edith,
Ricardo.
thank you so much. One more? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Edie, for coming tonight. So a lot of concern here in the HOA about flood insurance, and I think the HOA has been purchasing federal FEMA National Flood Insurance Program insurance for a long time, but we've read in the media, and if you do internet searches, there are a lot of private companies that are selling flood insurance. Is the NFIP, if the HOA would decide to go to a private vendor rather than FEMA via the Russo company who purchase it from FEMA, are those two flood insurance policies equivalent if they're both for the same level of coverage, 250 structural and 100,000 contents?
So I don't know, to answer your question. And that would be a good question to ask an insurance agent. because the private flood I can tell you almost verbatim what the NFIP policy says, right? What it covers, what it excludes. For private flood insurance outside the National Flood Insurance Program, it could vary significantly, just like some of the fire policies and some of the premiums. So it's kind of all over the map. So we would need to solicit the help of an insurance agent to kind of sort through what those different private flood policies, what kind of coverage they provide, and at what price point.
Thanks, Edith. I want to introduce Daniel Smith and Neal Joyce, and they're with the Sacramento Department of Utilities, and they'll talk about Sacramento flood defense and floodplain management.
Hello, good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. My name is Neal Joyce. I'm from the City of Sacramento Department of Utilities. I'm the supervisor over our development review and floodplain management section. And with me here is Daniel Smith. He's a junior engineer that works in our floodplain management section. So what I plan to do is just go over a bit about the drainage in the area, how that works, and what flood risk there is here and what improvements have been made so far. So the area we're in right now, Campus Commons, was once a very active floodplain. The river, before it had the levees, used to meander, expand and contract during different times of the year. It would flow in this area, and this was an active floodplain. But since then, levees have been constructed that has allowed for the development of this community, as well as much of the city of Sacramento. So related to the levees, the Lower American River levee system comprises of 26 miles of levees between Folsom Dam and downtown Sacramento. And as a result of the flood events of 1986 and 1997, it was recognized that improvements were necessary to bring these levees up to current standards. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers installed a seepage cutoff wall that had depths of up to 80 feet, and as well as they raised and stabilized the levees and corrected erosion problems along 25 miles of the system. Daniel, can you help me out by showing this levee seepage exhibit right behind you? Maybe walk it on both sides of the room. And so what you can see there is how there was under seepage on the levees that would cause flooding on the land side of the levee. And the improvements that were made were to install that slurry wall that's shown to go down 80 feet deep into the sand layer and prevent that from occurring. So that's part of the improvements that have been done along the American River. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is also working on providing 11 miles of erosion protection along portions of both the north and south banks of the American River. And once that's completed, the cumulative flood control improvements will allow the levee system to safely handle sustained flows of up to 160,000 cubic feet per second. So to get an idea of what that means, flows of 80,000 cubic feet per second will rise to reach the levee toe. So that's the base of the levee. In 1997, the event reached 115,000 cubic feet per second, and the 1986 event reached 135,000 cubic feet per second. So compare that to the now ability to handle 160,000 cubic feet per second. Things are improving, but there is still a risk. So the estimated completion for all of the levee projects in the region, which includes the Sacramento and American River, is 2027. It was 2025, but it's just recently been bumped back to 2027. On Folsom Lake, a new dam and auxiliary spillway was constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. It's called the Joint Federal Project. The new spillway was constructed adjacent to Folsom's main concrete dam and includes 1,100 feet long, a 1,100 foot long approach channel beginning in the Folsom Reservoir and submerged gates embedded in a new control structure designed to discharge water down a 3,100 foot long spillway chute. Because of this auxiliary spillway's gates, they're lower than the main Folsom Dam. dam operators can now have the ability to quickly create more available flood storage space in the reservoir in anticipation of inflows during storm events. So it gives them much more ability to operate the dam and reservoir in a more efficient manner and prepare for larger storm events. To further increase flood control space in the reservoir, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is raising the existing main dam and reservoir surrounding dikes by 3.5 feet, which began in 2019. So that talked about the levees and the Folsom Dam, two primary flood control systems. And now we'll talk about the city of Sacramento, which is our Department of Utilities. We own and operate a network of storm drain pipelines, levees, channels, streams, detention basins, and pump stations that all work together to provide drainage service for the residents of Sacramento. We have 106 different drainage basins, and because we're surrounded by levees, the majority of them need to be pumped to the river. So your community is located in City Basin 95. And the drainage in this area, I have a map here if you guys want to come up and take a closer look later. But the drainage in this community is collected by city drain pipes and is taken by gravity across Fair Oaks Boulevard over by Cadillac Drive, where we have our pump station that pumps the drainage out to the American River. So there are 3 primary ways that flooding can occur in the city. And those are our undersized clogged drainage pipes, our pump station failing, or levee failure. So an example of how this can happen is this January storm event where we had 2 weeks of rain, roughly nonstop. It wasn't a whole lot of rain as far as the city was concerned. Other areas had very intense rain, but within the city, it wasn't too bad. It was just continuous. But the problem was how windy it got. And what happened was a lot of the trees were knocked down on power lines. And so there was not only debris clogging our drain inlets, preventing us from being able to drain the area, we lost power at one point to 50 of our pump stations. And so once that happens, the pipes just start to fill with water and eventually there's no capacity and the streets start flooding. We do have backup generators at our larger pump stations, but for many of the smaller ones, like your Sump 95, we don't have a backup generator. We have portable generators that we take to our pump stations. But when we have 50 power outages at 50 pump stations, we don't have the manpower or the backup generators to get to all of them. So there is a possibility that if this pump station went down, that we might not be able to make it to it right away. You might have street flooding that would then prevent us from being able to get our portable generator over to the pump station. So not likely, but possible. So having improved levees does not necessarily mean, going back to levees, that the flood risk has been removed. There's always a possibility the levee can fail or be overtopped. Erosion is also a primary concern. So like I said, the river likes to meander, it likes to expand and contract. That causes erosion along the levees. And we have levee maintaining agencies that are responsible for keeping an eye on that, making repairs. But there's always, during these large events, if you have a lot of water coming down the river, there's only so much you can do. And if it starts to wear away, there's possible for a breach. That slurry wall should help protect, but you never know what's going to happen, and especially with these larger storm events that we're predicting with climate change, there's always a chance. So another thing I want to talk about is because there is always a risk of these levee failures, we've got rescue and evacuation maps that we prepared for various levee break scenarios. Maybe Daniel, can you show the map that we have that shows our different scenarios? So the city had a consultant put together some modeling, computer modeling of various levee breaks and what the flooding and inundation would look like and what roadways would be left open and for what periods of time. So on this map, we have multiple different yellow arrows that show different scenarios that we've modeled. And so I've actually printed up I have 40 copies here of a scenario that is adjacent to this community. Maybe can you show where that is?
Probably this one, right?
I think it's number 12.
Number 12?
Yep.
Okay, so it'd be a levee break scenario over here. So all of these yellow arrows up along the levee are different levee breach scenarios that we've modeled to see where flooding would occur. So
And this is all available on our city website. So if you just do a quick search, City of Sacramento flood, you'll be taken to these maps. We also have little icons there that you can take a picture of, and it will open up on your phone a link to the website. But this is an example of what the map looks like. And it shows depth of flooding and how long it's going to take to reach that depth of flooding. And on the back in green, the roads are shown that you can evacuate on and how long they'll be open. Yeah, it ranges. So best case scenario, you got 4 feet of flooding, worst case 12. So because of this risk of flooding, not only from a levee breach, but also, like I mentioned, a power failure or pumps not operating or clogged drain inlets, the city always strongly recommends that regardless of your flood zone, you always have flood insurance. Our flood zone map over there shows that this area is designated as zone shaded X, which means area protected by levee that does not require flood insurance. However, we strongly recommend that everyone pursue flood insurance. And that's all I have. If there's any questions? Any question?
Thank you so much. Good information. Stephen, there is a concern on the screen.
And there's a question on the screen too.
It's hard for me I can't get the question.
If the flooding occurs because pumps failed, is the city responsible for the damage caused by those? I believe that they are, aren't they?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because it happened about 10 years ago up here, just up the street, where one of the pumps into the river and it flooded the whole condominium. And
I believe there would be claims against the city, and I think it would be settled in court, but potentially the city could be liable.
Yeah. If the levee breaks, we're on our own, but if the city screws up, it's on you guys.
I think it depends on the situation, and if the city had any liability related to it, there could be act of God claim that there's nothing we could do about it. Also, it could come down to if we're out of power, it could be SMUD could be involved as well. But we are a primary service for SMUD. So if there's a failure, we're the first ones they try to reconnect.
There's a question up there. It says, where I lived previously, water table rise was a cause of home flooding. The normal water table was not far below the home first floor, and any substantial rain could raise the water table. Flood basements, first floors. Is water table flooding an issue here?
I haven't heard of that being an issue here in the pocket area. That is an issue. We have water that bubbles out of the lawns in the pocket, but I haven't heard of any reports of that here.
Thank you.
One more.
Thank you. It's a great presentation. Question for clarification. Pete Gelfie from Safeco told me a few months ago that our area has the lowest freeboard along the American River of any other areas. Is that true? Lowest freeboard, the vertical distance between the water level and the top of the levee.
I'm not aware. I don't know.
I've not heard that this is the lowest freeboard. I know that the American River Flood Control District, when we maintain it, we actually go out with laser levels to make sure that it's level, and that we try to true it up every year after erosion happens. But I can check and make sure we can get that information back to you.
I've texted him to confirm that, but he hasn't got back to me. Okay.
He is a great source, though. I would
Yeah,
believe what
he was a
says.
client of mine, so yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I actually have a couple of part question. I accessed those maps and looked at where my property is, and it looks like I can't drill in deep enough to see, am I on the 4-foot side or the 12-foot side? How can I get that level of accurate, not accuracy, but specificity to figure out if my property, what the level will be when this levee breaks and when that levee breaks?
I would say based on the refinement of these maps, that if you're anywhere near that deeper area, I would assume the deeper
Think of the
flooding.
deeper, okay.
Yeah.
So then the other thing is, how long does it take to get to 4 or 12 feet? Could it be minutes? Could it be hours?
It'll typically be hours. So the map should show you. So for example, I can go over this later with you, but we show on the map in red areas that will flood within 2 hours. The outer areas, you can kind of look at how long the roads will be open, and it'll let you know how long that area should not have flooding. So, but within this community, if there's a levee break adjacent to it, expect the area to be flooded within 2 hours.
Okay, because we have a 2-story, and we actually considered getting an inflatable raft. I mean, it's crazy, but I don't want to be, I can't swim, so a life jacket, there you go.
Do you want to come to the microphone, please? Because you're still on the phone or on Zoom.
It's most distressing to hear these facts, but I'll say they're not as bad as the ones I heard after, I think it was 86, when I stood on the River Park levee and the water was at almost in my toes. After that, the reinforcing instructions that we were given was that, don't worry, when those gates start closing on H or J Street, which means it's to protect the city, we will blow the levee on the Cal Expo side, which will flood that area. Can you give us any reinforcing?
I've heard that rumor too, but I don't believe it's true.
So
our age, there's no confirmation of that, and I don't believe that's accurate.
in addition to levee breaks, there's such a thing as a hydraulic dam. Is that something in your considerations? It happens all the time in all the streets. I've cleared drains in my neighborhood so other people could get in and out. This happens when the amount of water going through these drain pipes is so great that the water coming from the other drain pipes can't get in. And so it backs up. I'm only saying that because pumps notwithstanding, what is the capacity by the Civil Corps of Engineers for clearing those pipes?
Well, it's actually going to be a local issue. If it's our local drainage system that's clogged, it's going to be our city crews out there trying to clear it and activate our pumps.
I know I'm asking for a prediction of the future. Thank you.
Dan, just go to the microphone.
My name is Dan Proctor. I own 100 Dunbarton. I've been an insurance agent for many years. So I started in 1968. I started in 1968 with Farmers, great company. I got a notification the other day of private flood insurance. So I quoted my own home, found out that the premium was $400 a year instead of $760 a year. So I sent an email out to a few people. The quote was easy. The clearing the coverage with the company is a little difficult. I found out that they were still deemed to be a condominium, where NFIP flood would take us as a condominium. Private flood, at least the company I was looking at, would not. So I apologize to some people who might have received my email, and because the correction is that the rate is correct, except they won't take condominiums. So right now, private flood is kind of out, at least the companies that I've represented. And somebody asked a question about claims. The definition of a flood today is 2 or more parcels. So it can't just be flooding your property. It's got to flood two or more parcels. And Sacramento does flood. I've been here all my life. I've rode up and down boats in Land Park, so it happens. And the current policy that we have with flood insurance, the $250,000 limit, is good because they will pay all of that $250,000. Where if you buy a private flood policy, it's my understanding that you have to buy at least 80% of the full replacement cost of your home. Otherwise, you'll be participating in the claim. So you want to make sure that if you buy a private flood policy, or if we get involved in a private flood policy, that we start raising the limits of the coverage that we currently have, because a lot of our homes are worth more than 250,000. And other than that, basically, I was primarily trying to apologize to the people I sent an email to about this flood quote that I got. That won't work. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Am I on? I'm trying to clarify in my mind, if I have a pipe break upstairs in my condo and it floods the whole thing, is that covered by the HOA walls out, or the 250 and 100,000?
Yeah, your HOA is not
flood
going to pay
insurance?
for it. The 250K is.
That's not flood insurance.
Yeah.
What's gonna be the active nature.
From the outside?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Anything flooding from the inside,
That's not a flood.
that's not really covered.
It's not even called a flood. That's just
So-
water damage.
So everybody tomorrow, replace those little hoses from the toilet valve up to the tank.
Yeah, over the years, I get a lot of calls from my clients and they say, my house is flooded.
Say,
Well, if a pipe bursts inside your house, that's not a flood. It has to be 2 or more parcels from the river outside, and that's a flood.
okay, Stephen Johns is the Vice President of the American River Flood Control District, and we're going to hear from him. American River Flood District.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Johns. I'm a trustee for the American River Flood Control District. It's an elected position. We're a public agency. I've been on the board for about seven years or so. I'm a River Park resident. I've heard River Park get mentioned here. I grew up actually off American River Drive and went to Rio Americano. I was in high school in 1986 when the 86 floods happened. I remember, 3 things. One was that there were, that the night before we're at a basketball game and there were streets that were running like rivers. I remember the water coming up out of the drain inlets. And I also remember the next day in a rowboat with all my buddies going down American River Drive to visit friends. It is interesting when you look at the river when the river was just really high the first week of January after the first storm event. And we had some residents in our neighborhood who were new to the area, and they were I don't want to say freaking out, but they were very concerned. And the river was at I think it was at 35,000 cubic feet a second. And normally the river in the summertime, it goes like 2,500 cubic feet a second. So it was high. But, when you've seen it at 115,000 cubic feet a second or 80,000 cubic feet a second, when it hits the toe of the levee, or at 134,000 cubic feet a second, that the system handles a lot of water every so often. And so my district that I'm one of the trustees for, we're in charge of maintaining the levees. And we have a fairly large area. It's not just the lower American River. We also have Steelhead Creek, which goes up north to Rio Linda, and part of Arcade Creek. So we have 40 some odd miles of levees that we maintain. Part of the levee maintenance is just that maintenance. We also do a lot of operational stuff. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do. And I know that living here in Campus Commons, you see the levee all the time when you're going, at the edge of the neighborhood. You might use it for recreation. And you have probably seen a lot of our maintenance crews out there. Standard maintenance involves mowing quite a bit. We do a lot of rodent repair and rodent erosion or rodent avoidance issues, make sure that they aren't burrowing into the levees. We do a lot of maintenance where it's just involving tree branches that are down, tree trimming, things like that. We've had a lot of problems with erosion that's human-based, whether it's people who have a lot of, cut downs the levee to get to their back fence, or they use it for trails, or they might be students over at Sac State who are walking to school, something like that. And so we do spend a lot of time making sure the levees are in tip-top shape. Our goal is to maintain the levees in what we call like new condition, because we get inspected by the state twice a year. And we want to make sure that we are the preeminent levee maintenance district in the state of California, and make sure that our levees are always, looking and operating the way that they should. With that being said, the levees aren't off limit. I mean, they're open to everybody. We actually encourage people to use them for recreation. When we do that, though, the one thing that we are working with the public on is sometimes you might see our mowers out there, and we have a variety of different mowing apparatus, but the ones that we use a lot in the springtime are sort of large tractors with these big arms with a mower that kind of goes down the side of the levee. And you'd be surprised with something that is actually that dangerous and looks that dangerous. We still have bicyclists who cut underneath the arm. We have people that don't want to get out of the way. And so we're trying to really work with pedestrian and bicycle safety. But if you happen to be walking or biking on the levee and you see our crews doing their job, they're friendly folks. I mean, they're all really nice people, but do give them some space, especially if they look like they're doing something that is borderline dangerous for you, because it probably is dangerous. I do have the question about the freeboard. I'm going to check on that and I'll make sure the information comes back in here. That's interesting. One of the things we do, and I mentioned this, is every year we want to maintain the surface of the levee for inspection with gravel. And we know that after winter storms, it can start to sag or it can start to get start to deviate, and we'll go in there and we'll true it up. And it's amazing what our crews can do when they look at like a 400 or 600 foot segment and they're saying, oh, it's off by 2 inches. And they'll go out there and they'll retrue it up so it's even, and really looking to make sure that everything's in tip-top shape. Some parts of the levee we maintain a tow road where it helps with our maintenance operations. Some areas, like in my neighborhood in River Park, there's not a lot of room for a tow road behind fences. So that's one of the reasons why we purchased, and you might have seen this, it's this really cool remote controlled mower. Has that been over here? Yeah, it's pretty impressive machine. We actually have 2 of them now. It saves a lot of time, saves a lot of staff injuries from having to do that by hand on the side of a levee. And it's really popular with my son to watch that go back and forth. Yeah. Our budget's about $3.5 million. We're funded by assessments that appear on your property taxes. You'll probably see a couple different layers of assessments that appear. And one of them will be for American River. One will be for Safeca. And Neal mentioned some of the work that Safeca is funding. And after the 1986 flood, they realized that Sacramento needed a more cohesive form of flood insurance or flood improvements. And so they formed Safeca, which is a JPA, and it's comprised of my district, the American River Flood Control District, RD 1000, which is the levee maintenance agency that does sort of west of Natomas and all of North Natomas, the city of Sacramento, the county of Sacramento, and Sutter County. And so Safeca has its own set of assessments. They're generally flood risk based. It's not the same for everybody who lives in Safeca's area, but they have been very, very successful in providing what they call the local match and the local investment to bring in federal dollars to do a lot of the flood improvements that have been so necessary to give us the flood protection that we need. All the work that's going on right now on the Lower American, you can see it from the 8th Street Bridge if you're going towards East Sacramento or downtown. Those are Army Corps projects that have a very, very significant Safeca contribution to make sure that those are funded and able to be accomplished. That's what I have. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or at least I'll find the answer so I can bring it back to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I think we could have y'all come back one at a time and keep you here for a whole evening. Huh? Yeah.
So you talked about, I guess the question was posed by John about the freeboard along the American River, and asked Neal and Steve. And FEMA's here representing, Edie's representing FEMA. And there's this whole legal process to make sure that the levees reach a certain level of safety in order for this zone, this particular zone and other parts of Sacramento, not to be required to buy flood insurance. We are not required to buy flood insurance by federal banking law. Other areas are. In Natomas, if you were to have a new mortgage, you have to have flood insurance. They are improving the levees there. But as part of that, what we call levee certification, you have to, your levees.
I don't know. I hope the feistiness is just part of Kitty.
you have to have your levee freeboard, which John mentioned has to be at least 3 feet. So Sacramento, the levees have been built at different times. I knew when I worked on the levees for many years, the Sac State side of the levee had 5 feet of freeboard. That means from the top of the design water to the top of the levee was 5 feet. This side had a little less, but it's no less than 3 feet. So that, to a certain degree, I'm trying to answer the question that was kind of left hanging. There is at least 3 feet of freeboard because that's required to ensure that the levees meet the FEMA national standard. And I've worked on these levees for a long time of my career, and I'm still working part-time for the state in water resources. And one of the things that we say at public meetings is the levees in the Sacramento area, because of everybody's effort, the Corps of Engineers, SAFCA, the city, American River Flood Control District, the state of California Department of Water Resources, they've never been better than they are now, but there's always a threat that we cannot anticipate, either from a major storm or for something that we cannot see during a flood event because it's underwater. And that has occurred in other places in the country where levees fail because you do not see the threat that is occurring. So we're in good shape, but there's always a residual risk.
Do you have any comments you wanted to make, Stephen?
No, I don't. I appreciate that. And it's true that, you know, whenever there's high flow and the water goes back down, you know, our crews who have been on 24-hour watch during high flood events, they will always make sure they can inspect and understand what's happened under the water that we don't see. And there's always something that does surprise us. And I'm as a resident here, I'm happy that all the improvements are going in, so we hopefully can start to narrow the span of surprises that could happen.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of you for being here tonight. We really, really appreciate it. Hope we can get you back another time. Thank you. I don't think. Oh, I think, are you passing those out?
Yep, passing those out.
Oh.
Yeah, I talked to Pete back in.
Well, one of them.
Trying to hire.
Let's turn this off. Let's turn this off.
Don't